Good morning on this Sunday, July 17th, and welcome to the Georgia Gang. Recent polling shows Georgia voters may vote split ticket when it comes to races for Senate and governor. Also, Democrats at the top of the ticket are far out fundraising their Republican opponents. And Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger says the latest federal court ruling on Georgia's new voting law is a big win for election integrity. Phil and Theron are both here. Melita is out. We're vacation mode, folks, right? Brian Robinson is here filling in for Martha. The debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
New polling shows Georgia voters may give Republican Governor Brian Kemp a win if the race were held today, and also Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock. A new Georgia AARP poll released this week shows Governor Kemp with a 7-point lead over Stacey Abrams, 52-47. The same poll shows Senator Raphael Warnock leading his Republican challenger Herschel Walker, 50-47%. Now let's run the table. Phil, to you first, and can we delve kind of what's happening into the Senate race first? Do you think the more moderate voters may be uncomfortable voting for Herschel Walker at this point?
I think that's a big question, and of course things are just starting off. We've got until November, of course, and the ad wars are really kicking up into high gear. But I think what the AARP poll says, and by the way, that's a left-wing senior citizens organization. I think it's very interesting what they found. The age over 50 group is voting Republican, and it's actually a warning to Democrats. Say, you know what, the young vote Democrats have had a lot of trouble with, and to try to get out. Now that could change in Georgia. I will say that Stacey Abrams is very organized, but I think it's very interesting that the over 50 vote is solidly Republican, and it's a warning from the AARP. Republicans could run the table.
Theron, Phil and Brian promised not to gang up on you too much since, we don't have Melita here.
I left my boxing gloves in the truck.
Wait a minute, I didn't promise that.
But I want to ask you, a massive 88% of the people polled think the country is headed in the wrong direction. 59% think the same about the state. So what's the Democratic take on these types of numbers?
Well, let's start with the national perception. And look, Joe Biden is doing everything he can to really manage this country in a very tough time. I mean, we got to get inflation under control. We got to get gas prices down, which, by the way, are going down in Georgia. Not to the level we saw 2 years ago, but we are seeing a decrease. And, just want to commend the AARP. They're not a left-wing liberal group. They do a lot of great work for all Georgians, Democrat, Republicans, Libertarians. But the one number there, Lori, that you talked about is what the state feels. 50+% feel that the state is heading in the right direction. And so while this poll does show that Brian Kemp is up 52% over Stacey Abrams, 47%. But getting back to the Senate race, what I think we're supposed to talk about, is that I think that the poll accurately showed that Senator Warnock is being a senator for all Georgians, is that not only is he motivating the base, he's also motivating the middle. And then lastly, push back on something that Phil said. While this poll did focus on 50 and older voters, the way we won in 2020 and 2021 is because we had more young people vote for our candidates. And so while the seasoned voters are very important to us as Democrats, but I do think that we will continue to overperform when it comes to young voters in the state.
All right, over to Brian now, because only 34% of the likely Georgia voters polled say that the economy is working well for them, with inflation and the economy the biggest issues in both the governor's race and the U.S. Senate race. So how can Republicans capitalize on that?
Well, we don't have to, because Americans blame the incumbent White House party when the economy is on the wrong track. And one thing that's remarkable about those numbers, Lori, and this is great news for Brian Kemp, is yes, everybody's feeling the bite of inflation and gas prices, but they're blaming Joe Biden. They think the country's going in the wrong direction, but way fewer think Georgia's going in the wrong direction. We see recession breaking out. We're probably on the cusp of a recession. But I was talking with Chamber of Commerce types this week, and they were saying, not in Georgia. Like the rest of the country or other parts of the country may go into a recession, but our economy remains really strong. And Brian Kemp's got a great argument to make that I'm bringing in 7,500 jobs at Rivian, 80,000 jobs down in Southeast Georgia with Hyundai, more economic development announcements just this week. So Georgians who are getting tax rebates, who are getting tax cuts, who are getting billions and billions in surplus in the state budget, they feel like we're in much better shape than the country is. That's great news for Brian Kemp.
Well, Theron, this week there was some really good news for Raphael Warnock. The fundraising numbers look really good for him. In a race this high profile, money really does come into play here.
Well, that's going to be the game changer. And so, Brian wants us to believe that, the country is going totally in the wrong direction and that any day now we're going to collapse. Well, I do think that we do see some momentum going in a different direction. One of the things I push back on this is that you've heard me say this, Lori, is that, and I left this out 2 Fridays ago, but a couple Fridays ago, we saw the best jobs report that we've had in this country before COVID happened. I mean, we created more jobs in this period than we created before COVID. And so that's the thing that the Biden administration has got to continue to talk about. That while we do see an unusual sort of formula with the GDP and inflation kind of not mirroring what we saw with jobs being created, but we are seeing people getting to work. People are being hired. People are actually working in this country. But back to the numbers with Herschel Walker and Raphael Warnock. For Raphael Warnock to be able to raise that much money, I think that is a difference maker. Look, Herschel Walker is failed yet to really break through, and I think the polling showed that. I think a lot of Republicans are not rallying behind him like he thought they would. And so now you have a very popular, polished, articulate, an independent who's worked on both sides, who's a Democrat, but is pushing back on things that he doesn't believe that is right with the Biden administration, being a senator for all Georgia, and he's got that much money. I just think it's going to be very, very hard for Herschel to have any sort of chance of beating him.
Phil, let's talk about Herschel Walker because it was an interesting 2 weeks while I was out. I missed quite a lot. I want to ask you about 2 things. One, Herschel Walker's campaign really banning media at campaign events. And also, 2, he's talking about China getting our good air and us essentially getting their bad air, and he's really doubling down on this.
Yeah, and he's not a slick preacher who is,
Hey, I have to push back. Do not call him a slick preacher.
You know what? You have been insulted.
Well,
you have been insulting.
You can't say that.
You can't say articulate.
No, I can say that.
Well,
you can't.
You've been insulting Herschel Walker.
I never called him a slick
and I tell you what.
businessman.
Well, I tell you what. I think Herschel Walker talks Herschel Walker talk, and science, you always love the science, you Democrats do. The winds do shift around the world and take pollution around there. So I think it's a ridiculous argument. Now, let's go back to the media. As a longtime journalist, yes, he needs to have journalists come to his events. And I think for debates, he says he's going to debate. So that's good. Well, the one thing I think might be hanging things up, and I think they're going to be negotiating with the Warnock and Walker camps, is that I'm tired of these debates where you don't have even a center-right questioner. You always have these liberal questioners. And so I think the Atlanta Press Club especially, they ought to get somebody, get Brian Robinson, get somebody from around the state, get Austin Rhodes, Lori from Augusta. But I'm making a point here that it's always slanted. And I think Walker realizes that. Brian Kemp realizes that too.
Brian, let me ask you about Herschel Walker because, you were in charge of communications for Governor Nathan Deal, both on the campaign and while he was in office. Very accessible governor, really great interviews. Why do you think that they're just not allowing the media into these campaign events? I mean, this is earned media for him.
Whenever someone gets into politics, there is a steep learning curve. I think everybody kind of on the outside of politics thinks, oh, this is easy. Anybody can do this. No. Actually, it's really hard. It's the skill set, and it does require experience. That's why I don't like this whole outsider thing that we've seen in these last few years. Experience does matter, and it makes a difference. Even with someone as, a slick businessman like David Perdue, steep learning curve for him back in 2014 when he first got in. So let's see how Herschel Walker progresses. He needs to have talking points. He needs to stick to a script. And here's what I would like to see them do. Every week for the next 2 months, put out a policy position on energy, on education, on national defense. Give him some structure and paint a contrast with Warnock, not just on oratory and those abilities, but on substance. Because substance is where Warnock is vulnerable. Americans think that we're going in the wrong direction.
Theron?
But I think it's the substance that shows that why he's leading in the polls right now. I mean, let's go back. Senator Warnock is the #1 target, not just for Georgia Republicans, for national Republicans. Republicans want this seat. And so here's a man who came into office, and Brian and others tried to label him as this left-wing liberal Democrat, right? So he's worked very hard to talk about things that matter to the middle. He talked about insulin prices. He talked about gas. He talked about electric school buses, all these things that he's been talking about. And so it's not that we don't think that Herschel Walker can't debate. I want to go on the record saying this. I think Herschel Walker is going to do better than we think in the debates because we're not expecting that much.
We said he did better in some of the media interviews.
It's not that he can't debate. And Brian wants him to roll out policy issues, and that's fine. You'll have some very smart, capable man or woman sit there and come up with policy positions, but he's not going to be able to expound on them the way that an incumbent senator who's gone to Washington, been there for over a year, who's actually proven getting things done. I think that's where you're going to see the contrast.
All right, well, we got to go because I want to talk about the governor's race. Stacey Abrams proves she's a fundraising machine, but will that money mean votes? We'll discuss straight ahead.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
New fundraising numbers show Stacey Abrams comes out way ahead of incumbent Governor Brian Kemp. Over a 2-month period from May 1st to June 30th, she raised more than $21 million to the governor's almost $7 million. Phil, that's a pretty big difference. What do you make of these numbers?
It is a pretty big difference, but it's not surprising because we see that I would estimate, and experts are estimating probably about 70% of this Abrams money is coming from New York and Hollywood, the left-wing friends of hers and donors. And so again, Brian talked a few minutes ago about contrast. Let's contrast the Georgians that want to have Georgia a great place to live, and Stacey Abrams says it's a terrible place to live. That was a rare mistake on her part, and that's coming back to haunt her, I think. And I think that's one of the reasons why Brian Kemp is ahead, even though he doesn't have the money clout and won't have it until the fall. But it'll be very competitive.
Well, Theron, we know that money isn't everything, but it surely helps to get your message out. Polls show at this point Governor Kemp is ahead. But what do you make of Stacey Abrams' strategy? She's proposing tax rebates to Georgians, raises for teachers, and a suspension of the state gas tax even further. All things that Governor Kemp has already done.
Yes, and particularly with the rebate, what she's really saying, Lori, is that you have money that's there, and we talked about this last week, is that she's encouraging him to use some of the COVID relief money to give this rebate and this relief
But he would need permission.
He would need permission, so you're right. Now, when it comes to teachers, yes, let's give, I was about to call him BK, but no, Governor Kemp. Let's give the governor some credit. He did fulfill his promise to give the teachers a raise. It took him a little longer than he expected.
Because of COVID.
Because of COVID, and because the first year in the legislature, the will wasn't there to do it because some of his colleagues and Democrats wanted to sort of make sure they do it later on in the process. But what she's saying is that let's go ahead and actually raise their salaries to a level, I think it's what, $57,000 per year for them to get the raise. And so, look, there are things that she's proposing that the governor has either done or actually attempted to do. But I go back to Medicaid expansion, which the governor has proposed a waiver program that hasn't gone through. And so I think what Stacey Abrams' campaign is doing is that she's getting out in front. So when he does talk about those things that he's doing, she's able to do a contrast. But with that much money, $21 million, I think we can all agree, get ready, Georgia. She's going to flood not just the airwaves and your digital phones and radio and audio and everything. I mean, if she puts together a massive ground game like we did in 2020 and 2021, I think you'll see those numbers start to tighten because with that much money, I mean, you can only spend so much on television and on digital and audio. If she gets the momentum on the ground and actually getting people registered, and we know that based on the demographics, when you have 900 plus African Americans who still didn't vote in 2021, if we can just cut into a third of them and hold the middle as much as we can, then I think that's our pathway.
Right.
Isn't Biden a millstone around her neck, though?
Well, Biden is getting better. Again, his numbers are down, but I think that inflation will get better, gas prices will go down, people will be able to afford groceries.
I want Brian to weigh in here.
And things like that. And I think that if Biden numbers go down towards November, that will be very beneficial for her.
Brian, you have the floor.
Thank you. So, money is the mother's milk of politics, for sure. But there also is a point of diminishing returns. We saw it during that Senate runoff back in 2021, right? $800 million spent. Well, at what point did the next dollar not matter? We reached that point probably somewhere in November, long before January. And yes, she's going to have a huge spending advantage, but she's not an unknown quantity. Brian Kemp is not an unknown quantity. People's opinions, to some degree, are baked in. They are fighting for a very narrow sliver of the electorate. And right now, that sliver is going and giving the advantage to Brian Kemp. That's why he's continuously leading in these polls. what can she do? She's already spent more than Nathan Deal and Jason Carter spent during the entire 2014 campaign and hasn't moved the needle. Not at all. And so her dancing around the kitchen and trying to be likable, that's not working. And Medicaid expansion is a good issue for Democrats, but it's not going to be what gets her over the top either.
All right, can I move on? Because we will be talking about the governor's race for months. This week, the Savannah Morning News had an opinion piece questioning Democrat Jen Jordan's vow not to defend the state's so-called heartbeat abortion law if she's elected Attorney General. Theron, can the Attorney General pick and choose which state laws to defend here?
Well, I think what State Senator Jen Jordan is doing is that, look, she's got to strike a contrast between her and Attorney General Chris Carr. We saw when the reversal happened, Georgia was not the first state. I think Missouri was the first state, but we were in that first wave to come out and say, hey, we're going to push the birther bill, right? And so Jen Jordan is going to be asked the question, what would you do if you were Attorney General? And I think she clearly articulated, if she was Attorney General right now, that's what she would do. But what she also understands, Lori, is that we're a long way away from exactly figuring out what's going to be the state law when it comes to how women make a choice to do what they do with their bodies, particularly when it's giving birth. And so I think that this, to me, puts her in a position where I'm waiting to see if Chris Carr has responded or when he responds, because we know that she's a good debater. She's a very accomplished state senator. Brian has said previously that she's the one Democrat that Republicans worry the most about statewide. And so I think she's creating a contrast between her and her opponent.
Phil.
Well, she's made a huge mistake. This is a disgraceful comment. This is all too often what liberals do. They pick and choose, and they undermine the rule of law, which is the basis for a constitutional republic. I mean, what in the world? You are supposed to defend the state and its laws. Many of the past attorney generals have stressed this. I've talked to Chris Carr myself, our attorney general, and he's going to make this a big issue. Look what happened down in Brunswick with the DA Jackie Johnson. You know why she was removed? Part of it was because she violated her oath of office. Why would Jen Jordan even bother to take an oath of office if she's going to pick and choose what laws she wants? It's a disgrace.
Brian?
I have to disclose on the front end that Chris Carr is my client. So
okay.
Take all the rest of it with a grain of salt here. But the Constitution of the state of Georgia says that one of the 5 or 6 responsibilities of the Attorney General is to defend the state law in court. And if you don't do that, then the governor has to appoint a special Attorney General, meaning taxpayers are paying twice for, because you're still getting your salary as Attorney General. So that's why Chris is saying it's a dereliction of duty. I think where the punch is most powerful is that it plays into this national narrative with Democratic district attorneys who are putting out memos like Deborah Gonzalez over in Athens. These are crimes that I will not prosecute. You know, in San Francisco, if you shoplift $900, we're not going to prosecute you until it gets to $1,000. That sort of thing is setting in with Americans that Democrats don't take crime or standing up for the rule of law seriously.
But I think what she's going to be able to do quickly is that she wants to be on the side of fighting for women's rights to choose. And so, again, she's not the Attorney General. And so this is a campaign. Brian knows this. Phil knows this. Is that she can pretty much say whatever she wants.
But she's
now.
a legislator, Theron. She can do that in the legislature.
Hold on. I mean, I think the other thing is that I want to defend Deborah Gonzalez in Athens. That's my hometown. She's a great district attorney. And commend the other district attorneys that have come out, in which their legal right as district attorneys to say we're not going to enforce these laws if they put in place. And so we shouldn't be mad at them for basically following the law and basically coming out early and saying what they're going to do when it comes to the local DAs. Now, what we need to do is make sure that the Attorney General and the district attorneys are having a conversation, because it's coming. Mm-hmm. And Georgia's going to be in an uproar if you have this battle between what DAs are refusing to do and what an Attorney General wants them to do.
All right, we've got to leave it there, folks. Coming up, a federal judge upholds the part of Georgia's new voting law that puts limits on the number of absentee ballot applications that can be sent to voters. We'll discuss after this.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
A huge win for election integrity. That's how Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger described a federal judge's ruling about a part of Georgia's new voting law. The ruling says groups can still mail out absentee ballot applications, but not to voters who have already requested one and not to voters who have already voted. Brian, is this a big deal?
No, and I think what it does is stems from what we had in 2020, where we were all getting tons and tons of these ballot applications. And what it did was generate voter confusion. People thought they were getting ballots in the mail to some degree, and I think this is a way to help voters understand how the process works. You get an application, or you can go online and order your absentee ballot. But what this does is keeps these outside groups from flooding us with these applications. It's a very simple thing, and it's just one more example of how our election law is withstanding judicial scrutiny, and all of the screaming from the Democrats isn't holding up in court.
Darren?
I think that we got to be fair and say that it was on both sides. You have Republican groups and Democratic groups sending out multiple pieces of literature and mail to encourage people to turn in their absentee ballots. But one of the things that you've heard me say before about Secretary Raffensperger, and he got criticized for this, and I think he got blamed because he came out and said that every registered voter in the state of Georgia would receive an absentee ballot application. He did that in 2020. Many Republicans believe that's what led to the high turnout in the Democratic vote, and also which encouraged more people to actually vote absentee. So what we've seen now is the reverse with Senate Bill 202. It's less absentee applications that are going to be going out. It's harder to actually request an absentee ballot, and it's harder for you to submit your absentee ballot. And so I think that, look, we all are for making sure that voters are not confused, but giving voters the opportunity to vote absentee and making sure that they have the right information, I think that's something that we can support.
Phil, I really want to switch gears because it's a really important issue and kind of unfortunately a sign of the times, but the Cobb County School Board approved armed security guards can go inside school buildings. Now, we're not talking about teachers, but we are talking about these folks who have to be trained, and they will be armed inside the buildings. It was a very controversial vote.
Yes, it was. And I think the key word you just said is training. And what school's going to start in another month or so. I don't know when you could implement this. I think it's a good idea. We have got to have more security in the schools, and I think this is a good way to start. This is one of our largest school systems. I think it's the second largest in the state. And so they're trying to get ahead of some of the horrible shootings that we've seen in the past. So I think let's make sure they're trained, and I think it will give a measure for parents and students of calm and peace to know that someone is there, and that of course we can have technology and other things to protect our students.
Farron, do you think we'll see other school systems follow suit?
I think we will, but to Phil's point, I agree with him on the training, but also I think that, we got to make sure that these security officers, that they go through an extensive background check themselves. The one thing we don't want to happen is that if a teacher and one of these security guards, or even a student, and they get into a verbal altercation with someone at the school, then that gives them the opportunity, because they're the only ones that actually have permission to have a gun. And so I think the training is important. I think you'll see other schools see that would happen, because we know that, just look at what happened in Uvalde and other places, is that you can't just rely on law enforcement, because clearly that chief of police told his officers to stand down. I mean, seeing those horrific images of
awful.
Parents being tased and held back trying to go in to save their kids. And so having a armed security person who has the proper training, who's going through an extensive background check, and actually has a clear plan in place to, if and when something happens, I think we can support.
Brian.
You're making sense.
Brian, final word on this.
3 of us here have school-age kids, and 1 of us here has school-age grandkids. It's very personal and very scary, and I can't watch those videos in Uvalde because it's just too upsetting to me. If there's anything that we can do to take out an active shooter, I'm for it. I don't have all the answers. I think there are downsides no matter which way you go, but I want those people taken out.
But there are parents, Phil, who are uncomfortable with the fact that there will be folks with added guns on campus that are not police officers.
Well, that's true, but that's why you have school boards, and that's why you have elections, and they've done this policy. I think it'll be a model for other school systems. Let's see how this works.
But those parents, to Phil's point, this is where Cobb County is a leader in this respect, but they also got to be careful, because I've heard from some of those parents that don't want any guns around their kids, period. And so while we do need the training, we do need the supervision and the background checks, they got to make sure that the parents are fully on board with someone having a gun in the schools.
We'll be watching. All right, everybody, thank you. Coming up, winners and losers. Stay tuned. Time
now for the week's winners and losers.
I thought we'd have all this time because there's only 3 of you, but y'all were fired up today. So, Phil, we'll start with you.
Well, I've got as a winner House Speaker David Ralston, and I got as my loser Stacey Abrams, the Democrat gubernatorial candidate. Why? Well, you remember how Major League Baseball stabbed us in the back, and Stacey Abrams was claiming there was voter suppression falsely. And so Speaker Ralston has said, you know, this was wrong, and he is writing the commissioner, and he said, we want the All-Star game back here in Truist Park in the future. And so I think that's a good jab at Abrams. It reminds people of how she hurt us. And also, you know, I think we would all agree on this winner. The Department of Veterans Affairs, the regional office in Atlanta, we got a bipartisan measure to name it after the late Senator Johnny Isakson. I thought it was a good idea.
Yes, Theron.
All right, first want to make MARTA a winner in Clayton County. MARTA Board of Directors announced this week that they will put some bus rapid transit at 6
on my list. We didn't get to it.
Sorry, so I'll be quick. Also want to commend President Biden this week signed a bipartisan gun bill, and want to compliment Congresswoman Lucy McBath and her role in helping craft that bill, a woman who has been fighting for a long time about gun control and responsible gun ownership in this country. And then lastly, want to give a shout out to the Macon youth baseball legends who competed in the USSA World Series in New Orleans this week.
Nice, congrats. Brian.
That's fantastic.
See that clock?
Yes, I do.
Go for it.
So my winner is Democratic consultants like Theron Johnson, because we just talked about how much money the Democrats are raising. There are going to be Democrat consultants going on toward losses this November, but they're going to be backing up the bank truck and taking the loot, because they are going to make a fortune this year. That's my winner, Democrat consultants.
We will leave it there. Thanks, everybody. See you next week.